Welcome back. Now, amidst South Africa's ongoing economic challenges, including infrastructure deficiencies, corruption scandals, and ongoing energy crises, the volatile state of the rand remains a significant concern. From fluctuations in the global markets to social, political, and economic struggles, the journey of the rand has been fraught with uncertainty, leaving many left wondering about its ability to recover. Now, discussions surrounding the rand stability are indeed multifaceted and complex as they intertwine with broader economic trends, geopolitical factors, as well as investor sentiments. Joining us to delve deeper to explore the potential pathway forward for the currency and to assess its ability to recover is Director and Currency Strategist at Treasury One, Andre Cilliers. Andre, always a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all the listeners.
All right, Andre. I always call the rand the rogue rand because anything can happen, and often we do find that anything can happen. But Andre, at some point there was an inflection point and the rand has been on a downward trend since then. What exactly happened?
Okay, so if we look at the rand, then it's first of all look at internal factors and also external factors that has placed it on this downward spiral. Internally, Eskom, load shedding, Transnet, those are the vital ones. The inability of growth in the economy because a lot of exports cannot be exported because of the infrastructure. A lot of manufacturing people battle, their cost is high because they cannot really properly function without power all the time. So those are some of the internal factors, and that's still with us. Externally, and I think that was more important, was the strong US dollar, the movement of capital from emerging markets into the United States of America during a period of interest rate increases and interest rates that's at elevated levels throughout the world. Emerging markets as such suffered from that. Throw into that bag China that didn't grow as everybody expected it to grow. Some of their figures came out in the doldrums, and we know that we are heavily dependent on Chinese growth. So that also impacted on commodity prices. That was in a downward phase, not really recovering because there's no demand and so forth. So there's the reasons for the downward trajectory of the rand, and currently still there. At the end of it started the Gaza situation and the war between the Israelis and the Palestinians, or Hamas, because the war in Russia and Ukraine, I don't want to say is not important, but has less impact on the markets at the moment than what the current situation in the Middle East is.
Andre, with that said, of course, we've spoken about internal factors and external factors. Do they weigh the same? Does one have more bearing on the rand than the other? What happens globally versus maybe what happens here at home?
Okay, so external factors is actually because of the interwoven world economies and South Africa's interdependence on the rest of the world for growth and export, etc., always takes, I would say, precedent and weighs a little bit more than what local factors weigh. Last year, and I think we actually spoke about it on the show, I made the statement that local factors started taking precedent over international factors. But we must remember that that was during a period where the American ambassador made the accusations about the ship docking in South Africa and South Africa supplying arms and loading arms onto a ship, a situation that was well blown out of proportion, but at that stage sort of brought in the whole AGOA agreement, or that placed that in jeopardy, and then we had the AGOA conference. So there, local factors sort of increased in dominance factors, but overall, over a longer period of time, it's international factors that plays out more importantly on what happens to the currency.
Andre, I want us to then bring it back to the Big Mac index and helping us understand this index, how what we see with it is so different to what we see with the actual exchange rate, and if that could be a more accurate depiction of the rand or the exchange rate that you and I speak of often. That's the one that factors most of what's important in.
Yes, no, I think the Big Mac index, that's something that's done. It gets publicized, but really, in all honesty, that cannot, a burger cannot determine where your exchange rate should be in terms of an economy. The model on which McDonald's operates in America and the model on which they operate in South Africa is vastly different. In South Africa, they sell burgers and rent properties. In America, they own properties and then make burgers in the properties, so they're almost more of a property company there than they are a burger company, whilst the opposite is true here. And then it depends on, do you import or export, or they can't really export the burgers, but do you buy your patties locally? Do you import your patties, your little bun that you put it on, the tomatoes, so I'm sorry, really, to use the Big Mac index as a barometer of where your currency must be, I think that's a bit, I don't even want to use the word, but I think that's a bit.
I got you. I think it's an important thing actually to get out of the way.
The Big Mac index to me is definitely by far not where the currency should be at all.
Fantastic. I'm glad.
A lot more factors determining the value of your currency.
I'm glad we got that one out the way, because then, of course, there's still the conversation about the rand being deeply undervalued. I think I've seen numbers around 40 to 50%, undervalued there. Is that an accurate number we're seeing there? Is the rand undervalued? Is it overpunished?
Yes, most certainly the rand is deeply undervalued, and it's been for quite some time. So I think some of those local factors is generally really dragging on it. Being undervalued, but as you say, some people say 40%, some say 50%. All depends on the models that you use and how you run those models and the input. It's not everybody uses the same. But plain and simple, the rand is undervalued, and the true value of the currency against various currencies is currently undervalued. And here's an interesting one. It's more undervalued against the US dollar than it is, for instance, undervalued against the euro or the pound. And one must always, when one speaks about overvaluation or undervaluation, think in terms of the rand cannot just be measured against one currency. Why not? Because we are exporting products to more than one country. We are importing products from more than one country. And those percentages, or that trade with the various countries, takes on a certain percentage of the total trade with the international world. So therefore, when one speaks about the over or undervaluation of the rand, one would look at the over or undervaluation against a basket of currencies. And on a basket of currencies, yes, it is undervalued against the bulk, but more so against the US dollar. And the reason for that is that the dollar trades at very strong levels against most currencies in the world because of interest rate differentials.
With that said, I must ask you about the rand being a proxy for emerging markets, whether this is still the case. If the liquidity of the rand is seen as, something that could also be driving the very deep fluctuations that we see in the currency.
Yes, to our advantage, we have a very developed financial market, both in currencies, both in derivatives, and also in terms of trade in interest rates, etc. So our financial markets very, very well developed to the standards of first world countries, which means that you can trade big amounts of currency against the rand in a very short period of time. which is not, and there's a vast majority of products in which you could hedge yourself, far more than in a lot of other emerging markets. So in times of troubles in the emerging market space, where people need to hedge themselves against movements that could possibly take place in emerging markets, yes, the rand is still a proxy currency because of our first world standards in our financial market.
At this stage, Andre, we do see the rand trading very close to 19 rand to the dollar. I'm wondering if what would it take for us to see a recovery to close that, discount that we speak about, the undervaluing of a 40 to 50%. What would have to happen in South Africa and around the world for that to be the case?
So around the world, we need some clarity and less speculation as to when interest rates in America is going to start declining. So the 1 week a figure comes out and everybody jumps on a bandwagon and they say it's going to be in March. The next week another figure comes out and they say this is now postponed till June or July. Mr. Powell is clear, very, very clear, and he's been for some time, that they will be data dependent. They will watch what's the impact on the economy as such. Whether the higher interest rates works well through the markets to curtail the high inflation, and that they will want to see that inflation declines closer to their 2% target rate before they actually change their stance on monetary policy. He's once again said that last week after their interest rate decision. So I don't think that we will see any substantial changes there in the first quarter. Most probably only towards the end of the first quarter will we see any changes in monetary policy by the Federal Reserve. Locally, we have a budget speech coming up in just over 2 weeks' time. That's a very important budget this year. We know that the Minister of Finance is sort of in a very tight corner. We know that our income was not up to scratch. We know that our economic growth is not up to scratch. We know that our deficit will be substantial. We also know that it's going to be difficult to increase taxes in an election year. Only way that he could most probably look at that is by not increasing the tax table percentages to get that fiscal drag on that and earn some more money there. But we know that that's a tight budget, and we'll have to see what comes out of that budget. But I think the uncertainty up to the election, up to the budget, could push us a little bit higher, depending on where the dollar goes. But keep it at these levels, I think we could see the rand under a little bit of pressure leading up to the budget. The clarity after the budget might alleviate that again. And so I think it's going to be in a fairly tight range between 1860 and 1920 for the next month or so. It's been there for the last month, and I think it's going to remain there for the next month. In 2 weeks' time, I've just read that Mr. Ramaphosa will announce when the election will take place. It says 15 days after the opening of Parliament, he will make that announcement. And then we have that lead up towards the election. And now we know that there's lots of speculation about whether the ANC gets 30% or 40%. Latest that I read last night is that they might be below 40%, around the 39%. So more and more, it seems that we will be having coalitions. There could be big changes in the provinces, into how government looks in provinces and how it actually looks on national level. That will determine how big the changes is that we can expect in policy side. It is my true and honest opinion that the ANC will still be in power, be it with a coalition government or not, and that the chances are that there would be minimal changes in terms of economic policy. We will still have Mr. Ramaphosa as our president. Our deputy president might look a little bit different, but I think the economic changes would be minimal. And I think once again towards the elections, slightly negative after the elections, most probably returning. I do think that the second half of this year will be the time that we see a change in monetary policy out of the United States. I think that's the time when we will see that their economy is not doing as well as everybody thought it should be doing. They will change their monetary policy. Interest rates will go lower. It would start going lower throughout the world and most probably also in South Africa. And that could be the period where the dollar then weakens and the rand picks up its head against the US dollar. And I think we must clearly distinguish, pick up its head against the US dollar, not necessarily against the euro, not necessarily against the pound. So on that basket of currencies, we might not look at an overall strengthening of the currency, but purely against the US dollar. And that's the one that everybody watches. We could see some strengthening of the currency in the second half, and that would be important for if oil prices remain relatively stable for our fuel price, for instance, because fuel is paid and bought for in US dollars. So a stronger rand could spell some positiveness on that end, could spell then some positiveness in terms of inflation as well.
Well, Andre, always a pleasure hearing from you. Thank you for these insights this afternoon. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Business Lunch. That was Director and Currency Strategist at Treasury One, Andre Cilliers. That's all from the Business Lunch team this afternoon. We're back tomorrow, same time, same place. Catch the Nancy on the close at 5:30 this evening. But until then, stay tuned for lots more coming up right here on Business Day TV.